You are listening to The Brycen Show, episode 003, or 4, I'm not really sure which one it is at the moment, of the history series, British Israel and the Divine Right of Kings. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thy rod and thy staff? The rod was always viewed as the king's rod, or the governing stick, or beating stick, if you will. It was a sign of discipline and governing. The staff, usually taken to be the shepherd's crook, was a symbol of wisdom, and became basically, you can see it all over the place. The wise men in the priesthood would carry the shepherd's crook. Also interesting to note is that it is also believed that the constellations of the zodiac were created by the priests as they were standing out in the fields. But that's neither here nor there. But anyways, pay attention. Thy rod and thy staff, the governing of the king, and the wisdom of the priesthood. Now we'll go to wikianswers.com. What was Pharaoh's role in Egypt? The king was the high priest of every god of Egypt, and as such was the religious leader of the state, as well as being the governing head. In theory, the pharaoh performed the daily ritual to every god, purifying, clothing the statue, etc., the statue of the god 3 times a day. 3 times a day. Though in reality, the high priest of each temple did this in substitution of the king. The pharaoh was also a religious symbol of the people, as he was the intermediary between them and the gods, as shown in reliefs where his image was painted lower than the gods but higher and much larger than ordinary citizens. Though known to be mortal, he was regarded as divine. It was believed that all pharaohs were a descendant of the early gods, and became a facet of the god Horus upon taking the throne. Horus, the reborn sun god. And also to note, it's also interesting that the king and queen to this day still wear the crown, or the corona, which is symbolic of the gods of Horus, or the sun god, manifesting itself through the king. Anyways, when they died, they became a semi-god in the afterlife and a manifestation of the god Osiris. Interesting. And we're going to skip ahead a few thousand years to Louis XIV of France. This is from Wikipedia. This is the Divine Right of Kings. The divine right of kings, or divine right theory of kingship, is a political and religious doctrine of royal and political legitimacy. It asserts that a monarch or king is subject to no earthly authority, deriving his right to rule directly from the will of God. The king is thus not subject to the will of his people, the aristocracy, or any other estate of the realm, including the church. According to this doctrine, only God can judge an unjust king. The doctrine implies that any attempt to depose the king or to restrict his powers runs contrary to the will of God and may constitute a sacrilegious act. The remote origins of the theory are rooted in the medieval idea that God has bestowed earthly power on the king, just as God had given spiritual power and authority to the church, centering on the Pope. So here, what does the Pope use? The shepherd's crook. What does the king use? The rod. The immediate author of the theory was Jean Bodin, who based it on the interpretation of Roman law. With the rise of nation-states and the Protestant Reformation, the theory of divine right justified the king's absolute authority in both political and spiritual matters. The theory came to the fore in England under the reign of James I of England, also known as James VI of Scotland. Louis XIV of France, though Catholic, strongly promoted the theory as well. The theory of divine right was abandoned in England during the Glorious Revolution of 1688 to 1689. The American and French revolutions of the late 18th century further weakened the theory's appeal, and by the early 20th century had been virtually abandoned. Such doctrines are, in the English-speaking world, largely associated with the House of Tudor and the early House of Stuart in Britain, and the theology of the Caroline divines, who held their tenure at the pleasure of James I of England, Charles I, and Charles II. The Scots textbooks of the divine right of kings were written in 1597 to 98 by James VI of Scotland, before his accession to the English throne. His Basilican Doran, a manual on the powers of a king, was written to edify his 4-year-old son Henry Frederick King, himself ordained for his people, having received from the God a burden of government, whereof he must be accountable. The idea of the divine right to rule has appeared in many cultures, Eastern and Western, spanning all the way back to the first god-king, Gilgamesh. The conception of ordination brought with it largely unspoken parallels with the Anglican and Catholic priesthood, but the overriding metaphor in James's handbook was that of a father's relation to his children. Just as no misconduct on the part of a father can free his children from obedience to the fifth commandment, so no misgovernment on the part of a king can release his subjects from their allegiance. James' reading of the true law of free monarchies allowed that, quote, a good king will frame all his actions to be according to the law, yet is he not bound thereto, but of his good will. James also had printed his defense of the right of kings in the face of English theories of inalienable popular and clerical rights. The divine right of kings, or divine right theory of kingship, is a political and religious doctrine of royal and political legitimacy. Anyways, to go on, one passage in Scripture supporting the idea of divine right of kings was Romans 13. Martin Luther, when urging the secular authorities to crush the peasant rebellion of 1525 in Germany in his Against the Murderous, Thieving Hordes of Peasants, based his argument on St. Paul's epistle to the Romans, 13, 1-7. And let's pull that up, see what it says. Romans 13:1. Let every soul be subject to the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that does evil. Wherefore ye must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also. For they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to them to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Well, that surely is interesting. But, I mean, I'll do a show on Paul later, and I think the Apostle Paul, and that'll be an interesting show. Some of you probably won't care too much for my opinion on that, but anyways, back to Wikipedia. It is related to the ancient Catholic philosophies regarding monarchy, in which the monarch is God's vicegerent upon the earth, and therefore subject to no inferior power. However, in Roman Catholic jurisprudence, the monarch is always subject to natural and divine law, which are regarded as superior to the monarch. The possibility of monarchy declining morally, overturning natural law, and degenerating into a tyranny oppressive of the general welfare is answered theologically with the Catholic concept of extra-legal tyrannicide, ideally ratified by the Pope. The Pope assumed at times, due to the non-existence of other possibilities, and on account of the Church's spiritual superiority over kingdoms, the place of an arbiter of natural and divine law in deposing kings that had offended it, for instance, in attacking the liberty of the Church. Catholic thought justified submission to the monarchy by reference to the following. 1. The Old Testament, in which a line of kings was created by God through the prophecy of Jacob or Israel, who created his son Judah to be king and retain the scepter until the coming of the Messiah, alongside the line of priests created in his other son Levi. So here we have the kinghood and the priesthood. Later, a line of judges who were not kings, as they only had the power to provide insight to the people and not to take action to enforce their rulings, was created alongside the line of high priests created by Moses through Aaron. Later still, the prophet Samuel reinstituted the line of kings and Saul under the inspiration of God. The New Testament, in which the first pope, St. Peter, commands, this is all according to the Catholic train of thought, of course, commands that all Christians shall honor the Roman emperor, even though 1 Peter 2:13 through 17. At that time he was still a pagan emperor. Likewise, Jesus Christ proclaims in the Gospel of Matthew that one should render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's. That is at first literally the payment of taxes as binding those who use the imperial currency, but more widely interpreted as the offer of obedience and submission to the proclaimed worldly king, in matters not contrary to conscience. The endorsement by the popes in the church of the line of emperors, beginning with the emperors Constantine and Theodosius, later the Eastern Roman emperors, and finally the Western emperor, Charlemagne and his successors, the Catholic Holy Roman Emperors. The Catholic Holy Roman Emperors. We'll get into, I want to do a show on Rome, and that should be also probably slightly offensive. The French Huguenot nobles and clergy, having rejected the Pope and the Catholic Church, were left only with the supreme power of the king, who, they thought, could not be gainsaid or judged by anyone. Since there was no longer the countervailing power of the papacy, and since the Church of England was a creature of the state and had become subservient to it, this meant that there was nothing to regulate the powers of the king, and he became an absolute power. In theory, divine, natural, customary, and constitutional law still held sway over the king, but absent a superior political power, it was difficult to see how they could be enforced, since the king could not be tried by any of his own courts. Some of the symbolism within the coronation ceremony for British monarchs, in which they are anointed with holy oils by the Archbishop of Canterbury, thereby ordaining them to monarchy, perpetuates the ancient Roman Catholic monarchical ideas and ceremonial. And it says, although few Protestants realize this, the ceremony is nearly entirely based upon that of the coronation of the Holy Roman Emperor. However, in the UK, the symbolism ends there, since the real governing authority of the monarch was all but extinguished by the Whig Revolution of 1688 and 89. The King or the Queen of the United Kingdom is one of the last monarchs still to be crowned in the traditional Christian ceremonial, which in most other countries has been replaced by an inauguration or other declaration. And you know, a lot of people like to say that the monarchy of England doesn't have any power anymore, but they're extraordinarily rich and have a huge tie-ins to banking, cartel and stuff like that, so it's kind of, in my mind, hard to understand how they have no power when they wield such a strong financial hand in the world. But anyways, I'm going to read that again. Some of the symbolism with the coronation ceremony for British monarchs, in which they are anointed with holy oils by the Archbishop of Canterbury, perpetuates the ancient Roman Catholic monarchical ideas and ceremonial. The ceremony is nearly entirely based upon that of the coronation of the Holy Roman Emperor. The King or Queen of the United Kingdom is one of the I already read that. The concept of divine right incorporates but exaggerates the ancient Christian concept of royal God-given rights, which teach that the right to rule is anointed by God. Although this idea is found in many other cultures, including Aryan and Egyptian traditions, in pagan religions the king was often seen as a kind of god, and so was an unchallengeable despot. The ancient Roman Catholic tradition overcame this idea with the doctrine of the two swords, and so achieved for the very first time a balanced constitution for states. The advent of Protestantism saw something of a return to the idea of a mere unchallengeable despot. On the other hand, Aquinas forbade the overthrow of any morally, Christianly, and spiritually legitimate king of his subjects. The only human power capable of disposing the king was the Pope. The reasoning was that if a subject may overthrow his superior for some bad law, who was to be the judge of whether the law was bad? If the subject could go judge his own superior, then all lawful superior authority could lawfully be overthrown by the arbitrary judgment of an inferior, and thus all law was under constant threat. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, many philosophers, such as Nicholas of Cusa and Francisco Suarez, propounded similar theories. The Church was the final guarantor that Christian kings would follow the laws and constitutional traditions of their ancestors and the laws of the presumptive God of justice. Similarly, the Chinese concept of the mandate of heaven required that the emperor properly carry out the proper rituals, consult his ministers, and made it extremely difficult to undo any acts carried out by an ancestor. The French prelate Bossuet made a classic statement of the doctrine of divine right in a sermon preached before King Louis XIV. The reign of kings is from me, says Eternal Wisdom, and from this we may conclude that not only the rights of royalty are established by his laws, but also the choice of individual is the result of his providence. Well, we can also obviously see in all this that this was definitely written in a time where if you disagreed with these things, you would probably get your head cut off. So it's probably all going to sound real nice, real good. But remember, that's still giving ultimate power to one man, one imperfect man. Relationship with the doctrine of the two swords. That's what we were talking about earlier. However, this overlooks those parts of Scripture which provide for the doctrine of the two swords and for the medieval Roman Catholic concept of the powers of kings to protect the Christian constitution of states, to defend and extend the boundaries of Christendom by lawful means only, to protect and defend the innocent, the weak, the poor, and the vulnerable, and to protect the Church and the papacy with the king's own life, if necessary. The emperor was the first knight of Christendom, and the other Christian kings were his brother knights sworn to Christian chivalry with his devotion to justice and charity. This concept partly lived on in the divine right of kings, but was much undermined and attenuated by the cutting away of the spiritual arm, turning it into a mere department of state, subsidiary to the king. The result was that this then appeared to say that any attempt by his subjects to judge the king would be contrary to the will of God, and any person so acting would be damned. In China and East Asia, rulers justified their rule using a similar concept called the mandate of heaven. It was similar to the European notion of the divine right of kings in that both sought to legitimize rule from divine approval. However, while the divine right of kings granted unconditional legitimacy, the mandate of heaven was conditional on the just behavior of the ruler. Heaven would bless the authority of a just ruler, but would be displeased with a despotic ruler, and would withdraw its mandate. The mandate of heaven would then transfer to those who would rule best. Whereas revolution is never legitimate under the divine right of kings, the philosophy associated with the mandate of heaven approved of the overthrow of unjust rulers. In China, the right of rebellion against an unjust ruler had been a part of the political philosophy ever since the Zhou dynasty, whose rulers had used this philosophy to justify their overthrow of the previous Shang dynasty. Chinese historians interpreted a successful revolt as evidence that the mandate of heaven had passed. In the Malay annals, the Rajas and the Sultans of the Malay states, now Malaysia and Brunei, as well as their predecessors, such as the Indonesian kingdom of Majapahit, also claimed divine right to rule. The Sultan is mandated by God, and the Sultan is expected to lead his country and people in religious matters, ceremonies as well as prayers. This divine right is called Daulat, and although presently the notion of divine right is somewhat obsolete, one can still see banners and posters with pictures of the reigning Sultan with words Daulat Tuanku, similar to the European proclamation of Long Live the King on streets and buildings. In Indonesia, especially on the island of Java, the Sultan's divine right is more commonly known as the Wahyu, or the Revelation. but it is not hereditary and can be passed on to distant relatives. In Tamil culture, before Brahmanism, and especially during the Konkan period, emperors were known as Irayer, or those who spill, and kings were called Ko or Khan. During this time, the distinction between kingship and godhood had not yet occurred, as the caste system had not yet been introduced. Even in modern Tamil, the word for temple is something strange, meaning king's house. Kings were understood to be the agents of God, as they protected the world like God did. They may well have been continued post-Brahmanism in Tamilakam, as the famous Thiruvalangandadu description states. Having noticed by the marks on his body that Arulmazi was the very Vishnu, which, that's Hindu right there, mythology, in reference to the Emperor Raja Kola, number 1. And the next section of this is the opposition to the divine right of kings. In the late mid-16th century, among groups of English Protestant exiles fleeing from Queen Mary I, some of the earliest anti-monarchist publications emerged. Weaned off uncritical royalism by the actions of Queen Mary, the political thinking of men like Pone, Knox, Goodman, and Hales. In 1553, Mary I, a Roman Catholic, succeeded her Protestant half-brother Edward VI to the English throne. Mary set about trying to restore Roman Catholicism by making sure that Edward's religious laws were abolished in the Statute of Repeal Act. The Protestant religious laws passed in the time of Henry VIII were repealed, and the revival of the Heresy Acts were passed in 1554. The Marian persecutions began soon afterwards. In January 1555, the first of nearly 300 Protestants were burnt at the stake under Bloody Mary. When Thomas Wyatt the Younger instigated what became known as Wyatt's Rebellion, John Pone, the highest-ranking ecclesiastic among the exiles, allegedly participated in the uprising. He escaped to Strasbourg after the rebellion's defeat, and the following year he published a short treatise of politic power, in which he put forward a theory of justified opposition to secular rulers. Pone's treatise comes first in a new wave of anti-monarchical writings. Jeez. I really need to clean this reading skills up. It has never been assessed at its true importance, for it antedates by several years those were more brilliantly expressed by less radical Huguenot writings, which have usually been taken to represent the tyrannicide theories of the Reformation. Pone's pamphlet was republished on the eve of King Charles I's execution. According to U.S. President John Adams, Pone's work contained all the essential principles of liberty, which were afterward dilated on by Sidney and Locke, including the idea of a three-branched government. In due course, opposition to the divine right of kings came from a number of sources, including poet John Milton in his pamphlet, The Tenure of Kings and Magistrates. Probably the two most famous declarations of a right to revolution against tyranny in the English language are John Locke's essay concerning the true original, extent, and end of civil government, and Thomas Jefferson's formulation in the United States Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. And now, earlier we were talking about King James I, and he was one of the first big proponents, sort of, in the English European days of the divine right of kings. We'll get into that. This is his writing from himself, King James I, on the divine right of kings. The state of monarchy is the supremest thing upon earth. Kings are justly called gods. And remember, this is the guy that gave you the King James Bible. So it makes you wonder if maybe, some of these writings were translated in support of this divine right of kings. But anyways, we'll get into it. The state of monarchy is the supremest thing upon earth. Kings are justly called gods, for that they exercise a manner or resemblance of divine power upon earth. For if you will consider the attributes to God, you shall see how they agree in the person of a king. God has power to create or destroy, make or unmake at his pleasure, to give life or send death, to judge all and to be judged, nor accountable to none. To raise low things and to make high things low at his pleasure, and to God are both soul and body due. And the like power have kings. They make and unmake their subjects. They have power of raising and casting down, of life and of death, judges over all their subjects, and in all causes, and yet accountable to none but God only. Boy, that's an ego. Now in these our times we are to distinguish between the state of kings and their first original, and between the state of kings and monarchs that do at this time govern in civil kingdoms. In the first original of kings, whereof some had their beginning by conquest, and some by election of the people, their wills at that time served for law. Yet how soon kingdoms began to be settled in civility and policy, then did kings set down their minds by laws. And I am sure to go to my grave with that reputation and comfort, that never king was in all this time more careful to have his laws duly observed, and himself to govern thereafter, than I. I conclude then this point touching the power of kings with this axiom of divinity, that is, to dispute what God may do is blasphemy. So is it sedition in subjects to dispute what a king may do in the height of his power. But just kings will ever be willing to declare what they will do if they will not incur the curse of God. I will not be content that my power be disputed upon, but I shall ever be willing to make the reason appear of all my doings, and rule my actions according to my laws. Therefore all kings that are not tyrants or perjured will be glad to bound themselves within the limits of their laws, and they that persuade them the contrary are vipers and pests, both against them and the commonwealth. Interesting, very interesting. And let's see. I guess we should probably touch upon go back to the mandate of heaven. This will be from Wikipedia. The concept is first found in the written records of the words of the Duke of Zhou, younger brother of King Wu of Zhou, and regent for King Wu's infant son, King Cheng of Zhou. He is considered by many to have been the originator of the idea. The notion of the mandate of heaven was later invoked by Mencius, a very influential Chinese philosopher, considered by most to be the second greatest Confucian philosopher next to Confucius. The mandate of heaven was first used by the Zhou dynasty to justify its overthrow of the Shang dynasty, and would be used by many succeeding dynasties in the same way. The Duke of Zhou explained to the people of Shang that if their king had not misused his power, his mandate would not have been taken away. Eventually, as Chinese political ideas developed further, the mandate was linked to the notion of the dynastic cycle. Severe floods or famines were considered portents and monitions, indicating divine disapproval of the recent activities of the ruler. The Shang had legitimized their rule by family connections to divine power. The Shang believed that their founders were deities, and their descendants went to join them in heaven. Now pay attention to this, because most of these divine right of kings and different civilizations that believed in that would always assume that their rulers were descendants of gods of some sort, and most notably serpentine or reptilian gods. Anyways, we'll continue. The philosophy of the mandate of heaven changed the right to rule from one of purely divine legitimization to one based on just rule. Although the mandate had no time limitation, it held rulers to a clear standard. Over the passage of time, there would inevitably arise a ruler who would cause heaven to withdraw its mandate. As the mandate of heaven emphasized the performance of the ruler, the social background of the ruler became less important. Historical documents found in ancient China stated that a legitimate ruler could come from any spectrum of the society. And any player of Japanese RPGs will see this storyline played out time and time again. I'll say that again. Historical documents found in ancient China stating that a legitimate ruler could come from any spectrum of the society. The Zhou said that the Xia dynasty had existed long before the Shang, and that they were overthrown by reason of their losing the mandate. The existence of the Xia dynasty attested only in legend. Archaeological finds indicate human habitations, including fairly large cities, before the Shang, but so far no evidence has surfaced that would verify either the names of those who ruled over these cities, their form of government, or any other specifics. There is likewise no evidence that anyone before Zhou times had enunciated the idea of Tianming, the mandate of heaven. On the other hand, this idea appears in more than one context in the Shu Jing, or the Book of Records, as an accepted fact of life rather than something they needed. As an accepted fact of life rather than something that needed any introduction. The mandate of heaven is based on 4 ideas. The right to rule China is granted by heaven. There can be only one legitimate ruler of China. The right to rule is based on the virtue of the ruler and his good performance as a steward for heaven. The right to rule may be passed down from father to son, but only on the conditions established above. Once the mandate is lost, the will of heaven towards a successor will only be known by the working out of the imponderable force of events in human history. These 4 leading ideas have important implications. Legitimization of the ruling house in the eyes of the people who come under its sway. Times of divided rule require some rationalization after the fact to establish which ruler can claim truly to have the mandate. The rulers put checks on their own behavior and are encouraged to invest in the well-being of their subjects. The rulers necessarily fear rebellion, because they believe in active intervention from heaven, and or possibly because they know that misbehavior will give positive sanction to attempts by others to overthrow them. The Shang dynasty had its prosperous times filled with many outstanding accomplishments. Notably, the dynasty lasted for a considerable number of years, in which 31 kings ruled over an extended period of 17 generations. During this period, the dynasty was able to enjoy a period of peace and tranquility in which citizens could make a good living. The government was originally able to control most of its internal affairs due to the firm support provided by the people. As time went on, however, the rulers' abuse of the other social classes led to social unrest and instability. The corruption in this dynasty created the conditions necessary for a new ruling house to rise. It became the Zhou dynasty. Rebellion against the Shang was led by Zhou Wu. They explained their right to assume rule as coming from the will of heaven. They believed that the Shang ruling house had become morally corrupt and that the Shang leaders' loss of virtue entitled their own house to take over. The overthrow of the Shang dynasty, they said, was in accord with the mandate given by heaven. After the Zhou gained control of the dynasty, they instituted mostly their own officials. However, in order to appease some of the citizens, they allowed some of the Shang beneficiaries to continue governing the small kingdoms in which they had been governing, but in compliance with the Zhou rules and regulations. As the empire continued to expand, much intermarriage became imminent. This was done because the rulers believed that it was a method of forming strong allies that enabled them to absorb more countries into the dynasty. In case of a war, the Zhou dynasty boasted an excellent military and technology, mostly because of influence from annexed countries. They also excelled in shipbuilding, which made them excellent mariners because of their discovery of navigating their ships to a precise destination by using the stars as their guide. Intellectually, the Zhou excelled in fields of literature and philosophy. Many governmental positions were dictated around the intellectual ability of a candidate. Many of the literature from the Zhou period included the Book of Changes, the Book of History, Book of Etiquette, Book of Song, Book of Odes, and the Book of Rites. Most of these literatures observed the progress and political movement of the dynasty. In philosophical terms, Confucius and his followers played an important role in shaping the mentality of the government. These critical thinkers served as a foundation for the government. Their works primarily stressed the importance of ruling class respect and their relationship with the lower class. Due to the growing size of the dynasty, it became apparent that a centralized government would lead to a lot of confusion and corruption, because the government would not be able to exert its influence or compromise the needs of everyone. To address this political barrier, the dynasty formed a decentralized government in which the empire was broken down into sections. Within these districts were administrators who were appointed by the government. In return, they had to maintain their allegiance to the main internal government. In effect, the Zhou dynasty became a collection of districts. Consequently, this marked the fall of the dynasty as it became difficult for the central government to exert influence on all other regions of the empire. Anyways, let's skip forward a little bit. In Japan, the concept of a divine political legitimacy that is conditional and could be withdrawn was ideologically problematic. In Japan, this problem was obviated because the imperial house of Japan claimed to be descended in an unbroken line from the Japanese sun goddess Amaterasu. Nevertheless, while maintaining this role, the Japanese emperor became politically marginalized in the Nara and Heian periods by powerful regents of the Fujiwara clan who seized executive control of state. Even though the Japanese imperial line itself remained unbroken after the 8th century, actual political authority passed through successive dynasties of regents and shoguns, which cycled in a manner similar to that of Chinese dynasties. Even after the Meiji Restoration in 1868, when the emperor was placed back in the center of the political bureaucracy, the throne itself had very little power vis-a-vis the Meiji oligarchy. Actual political power had passed through at least 4 systems since the Meiji Restoration: the Taishu democracy, the militarists, the occupation of Japan, and post-war democracy. The emperor today is a political figurehead and not a ruling sovereign. It could be said that the imperial line of Japan survived for so long precisely because it did not have control over the state, and that the turmoil of succession was projected onto a series of proxy rulers. And here we see again they all believe they're descended from some sort of sun god. So we're seeing this same deal at now like 3-4 different civilizations where the rulers are descended from some sort of god. And B, that the emperors or rulers or these figureheads of today have no political power, which maybe they have no political power, but at the same time they have a very strong and heavy financial hand. And as most of us know, money will buy power. Let's see. And now we're going to move on to the British Israelism. And I think these two subjects are intertwined. And I think you'll kind of start to be catching on as we go along into this set of beliefs. Anyways, according to Wikipedia, according to British Israelism, the lost 10 tribes of Israel found their way to Western Europe and Britain, becoming ancestors of the British and related peoples. British Israelism, also called Anglo-Israelism, is the belief that people of Western European descent, particularly those in Great Britain, are the direct lineal descendants of the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The concept often includes the belief that the British royal family is directly descended from the line of King David. Blonde-haired, ruddy-faced King David. So yeah, I think you can already tell where this is going. There has never been a single head or organizational structure to the movement. However, various British Israelite organizations were set up across the British Commonwealth and in America from the 1870s, and many continue to exist. Adherents may hold a diverse set of beliefs and claims that are ancillary to the core genealogical theory, but there are central tenets that all British Israelites follow, including the two-house theology, which is at the core of British Israelism. A central teaching of the British Israelites' two-house theology is that while Jews are considered to be Israelites, not all Israelites are considered to be Jews. British Israelites believe that Jews descend only from the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, while the House of Israel gave rise to the British people or Anglo-Saxon Celtic kindred peoples of northwestern Europe. So they're saying that there is a tie between the tribe of Judah, which would be the Jews in its original context, but British Israelites believe that the Jews are the Jews, but that the rest of the tribes of Israel moved north into Britain and the islands and stuff, and populated the area. And around here somewhere, I have an apocryphal book of Paul's journey to Britain, but I couldn't locate it because it's pretty small. But that's something you should look into as well. Okay, from the Jewish Encyclopedia, Anglo-Israelism. A theory which identifies the Anglo-Saxon race with the lost 10 tribes. Its adherents who claim that the promises given to Israel will be fulfilled with regard to England and America are said to number 2 million in England and the United States. And at one time they included in their ranks a member of the English House of Lords and colonial bishop of the Church of England. They have issued several weeklies in defense of their views. So here you see that this idea has actually penetrated the Church of England and the English House of Lords, at least. And there is one publisher in London whose publications are devoted entirely to the cause. Strictly speaking, the believers in Anglo-Israelism do not form a sect, as most of its members retain communion with the Church of England, and they only hold their views as a supplementary, pious opinion. The first person who seems to have broached these views was the eccentric Richard Brothers, who styled himself nephew of the Almighty, and in his revealed knowledge claimed, looks like it's a book, claimed to be descended from David and prophesied that he would be revealed as Prince of the Hebrews on November 19, 1795. In 1822, Brothers published his, quote, correct account of the invasion of England by the Saxons, showing the English nation to be descendants of the lost 10 tribes, end quote, which may be regarded as the foundation of the movement. He was followed by J. Wilson, who placed the theory upon its present basis, by W. Carpenter and by F.R.A. Glover. And these guys, I'll give you a list of books if you wanted to go into this further. Our Israelitish Origin by J. Wilson, 1845. Israelites Found by W. Carpenter. And F.R.A. Glover, England, the Remnant of Judah. And then the movement obtained a somewhat distinguished adherent in C. Piazzi Smith, Astronomer Royal for Scotland, who in his bizarre work, Our Inheritance in the Great Pyramid, here we go, intended to prop up the cause by showing the identity of British weights and measures which are those of the ancient Egyptians and Hebrews, which they are very accurate, they are very closely related, which you can find that out online. I might try to do a show over it, but it's hard to do. I'm no mathematician, so I'd probably steer you in the wrong direction. Anyways, the chief representative, however, in England was Edward Hine, of whose identification of the British nation with lost Israel, 250,000 copies are said to have been sold. He also published for several weeks a weekly journal, The Nation's Leader, and a monthly magazine, Life from the Dead. In America, the chief leaders of the movement appear to have been G. W. Greenwood, who published a monthly journal, Heir of the World. The theory has been extended to Germany, though it does not appear to have attracted much notice there. The theory of Anglo-Israelism is based upon an extremely literal interpretation of the Old Testament, as represented by King James Version and by an application of texts brought together from the prophecies about Israel. And its advocates attempt to bring their readers into the dilemma that England and its colonies must be the Israel to whom the promises were made in the Bible, or that these promises have been unfulfilled. At the start, distinction is made between the ultimate fates of Israel and Judah. For the former of all the blessings of the Bible are reserved, whereas the latter, represented in modern times by the Jews, are to experience all the curses threatened to the backsliding people in the prophecies. It is pointed out that while in the prophecies Israel will change his name, be numberless, dwell in islands, with colonies, and be the chief of the nations, Judah will be a byword. The isles, to which Israel was banished, were to be north and west of Palestine, and to be in a cold climate, since it is said, heat nor sun will smite them. It was further prophesied that the isles would become too small for Israel, and that Israel should be a nation and company of nations. It would therefore have colonies, so that it might surround the nations, and be above them all. I should go back here. I'm going to read this over, and I'm going to give you the Bible verses. Israel will change his name, Hosea 1, chapter 9, be numberless. not sure what that is. Dwell in islands, Isaiah 24:15, with colonies and be the chief of nations, Micah verse 8. Judah will be a byword, Jeremiah 15 verse 4. The isles, Isaiah, to which Israel was banished were to be north, Jeremiah 3:12, and west, Isaiah 24:15 of Palestine. Heat nor sun will smite them, Isaiah. It was further prophesied that the isles would become too small for Israel, Isaiah again, and that Israel should be a nation and company of nations, Genesis 35:11. Anyways, the children of Israel will always know and recognize the Lord, which of course is interpreted to mean will be members of the true Church of England. Well, you can take that how you will. This is from the Jewish Encyclopedia, so it is their take on it. The Anglo-Israelites triumphantly ask, what nation save England corresponds to all these prophetic signs? In further confirmation, it is pointed out that one of the tribes of Manasseh was to become an independent nation. The United States obviously represents Manasseh. Both Ephraim and Manasseh shall exterminate the aborigines, push the people together, in the countries in which they spread. The lion and the unicorn are referred to in Numbers 24, 8, and 9. While the American eagle is intended in the prophecy in Ezekiel 17, verse 3. The promise that Israel shall possess the gates of his enemies, Genesis 22, verse 17, and Genesis 24, verse 60, is taken to be fulfilled in the possession by England of Gibraltar, Malta, Heligoland, Aden, and Singapore. Finally, it was prophesied that Israel should bear another name and speak another tongue. All these characteristics of Israel, as distinguished from Judah, are fulfilled, it is contended, in England, its colonies, and the United States. The historical connection of the ancestors of the English with the lost 10 tribes is deduced as follows. The 10 tribes were transferred to Babylon about 720 BC, and simultaneously, according to Herodotus, the Scythians, including the tribe of the Saki, appeared in the same district. The progenitors of the Saxons afterward passed over the Denmark, or country of the tribe of Dan, and thence to England. Another branch of the tribe of Dan, which remained in ships, made its appearance in Ireland under the title of the Tuatha Da Danann. Tefi, a descendant of the royal house of David, arrived in Ireland. According to the native annals, in 580 BC, from her was descended Fergus More, king of Argyll, an ancestor of Queen Victoria, who thus fulfilled the prophecy that the line of David shall rule forever and ever. So here we get into the divine right of kings, but anyways. The Irish branch of the Danites brought with them Jacob's stone, which has always been used as the coronation stone of the kings of Scotland and England, and is now preserved in Westminster Abbey. Somewhat inconsistently, the prophecy that the Canaanites should trouble Israel is applied to the Irish. The land of Arzareth, to which the Israelites were transplanted, 2 Esdras 8:45, is identified with Ireland by dividing the former name into 2 parts, the former of which is Erez, or land, the latter is Ar, or Ire. Philology of a somewhat primitive kind is also brought in to support the theory. The many biblical quasi-Jewish names borne by Englishmen are held to prove their Israelitish origin. An attempt has been made to derive the English language itself from Hebrew. Thus Baron is derived from Barson, or Barry from Perry, Garden from Geter, Kid from Giddy, Scale from Shekel, and Kitten from Gittin. The termination ish is identified with the Hebrew ish, or man. Spanish means Spain man, while British is identified with Barrett-ish, or man of the covenant. Perhaps the most curious of these philological identifications is that of jig with chag, or hag equals festival. Altogether, by the application of wild guesswork about historical origins and philological analogies, and by a slavishly literal interpretation of selected phrases of prophecy, a case was made out for the identification of the British race with the lost 10 tribes of Israel, insufficient to satisfy uncritical persons desirous of finding their pride of race confirmed by Holy Scripture. The holy theory rests upon an identification of the word isles in the English version of the Bible unjustified by modern philology, which identifies the original word with coasts or distant islands, without any implication of their being surrounded by the sea. Modern ethnography does not confirm it in any way the identification of the Irish with a Semitic people, while the English can be traced back to the Scandinavians, of whom there is no trace in Mesopotamia at any period of history. English is a branch of the Aryan stock of languages, and it has no connection with Hebrew. The whole movement is chiefly interesting as a reductio ad absurdum of too literal an interpretation of the prophecies. The Anglo-Israelite theory has of recent years been connected with the persecution of the Jews, in which the Anglo-Israelites see further confirmation of their position by the carrying out of the threats prophesied against Judah. This side of the subject has been dealt with by T.R. Hallett in an Anglo-Israel Jewish problem. But anyways, I did a pretty good job of covering the belief systems of the British Israelism set of beliefs, and some of it's kind of compelling, it really is, but who knows? That's for you to decide. Alright, next we'll go to Christian Zionism from Wikipedia. Christian Zionism is a belief among some Christians that the return of the Jews to the Holy Land and the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 is in accordance with biblical prophecy. It overlaps with, but is indistinct from, the 19th century movement of the restoration of the Jews to the Holy Land, which had both religiously and politically motivated supporters. The term Christian Zionism was popularized in the mid-20th century. Prior to that time, the common term was restorationism. Some Christian Zionists believe that the ingathering of Jews in Israel is a prerequisite for the second coming of Jesus. This belief is primarily, though not exclusively, associated with Christian dispensationalism. Damn. The idea that Christians should actively support a Jewish return to the land of Israel, along with the parallel idea that the Jews ought to be encouraged to become Christian as a means fulfilling a biblical prophecy, has been common in Protestant circles since the Reformation. Many Christian Zionists believe that the people of Israel remain part of the chosen people of God, along with the engrafted Gentile Christians. This has the added effect of turning Christian Zionists into supporters of Jewish Zionism. Christian advocacy of the restoration of the Jews arose following the translation of the Bible into the vernacular, principally in England among the Puritans. A plain reading of such translated biblical texts, in some proponents' opinions, is interpreted as evidence that God still has a special relationship with Israel, especially Romans 11, which begins, "I say then, hath God cast away his people? God forbid, for I also am an Israelite, of the seed of Abraham, of the tribe of Benjamin." Again, from Paul, it continues with a parable of a grafted olive tree, the point of which is disputed. Some say that it is the restoration of Israel to promised land. Others say that it is Gentiles being grafted into the covenant of God with Israel's faithful remnant. The biblical foundations of Christian doctrines regarding the theological status of Jews includes prophetic and didactic texts. Some supporters of the restoration of the Jews interpret the prophetic texts as describing inevitable future events. And these events primarily involve Israel, taken to mean the descendants of the biblical patriarch Jacob or Judah. People who take them at face value see these prophecies as requiring the presence of a Jewish state in the Holy Land, the central part of the lands promised to the biblical patriarch Abraham in his covenant with God. This requirement is sometimes interpreted as being fulfilled by the contemporary state of Israel. The didactic texts of the epistles also include explanations of the events described in prophecy, and so complement and expand upon their significance. Among the principal relevant prophetic texts are those found in the Jewish Bible or Old Testament in the book of Daniel, the book of Isaiah, and the book of Ezekiel, and those found in the New Testament in the book of Revelation. These Old Testament books describe the apocalypse, meaning literally the unveiling, a vision of an eschatological event or end times. The book of Revelation, or in the original Greek, I'm not sure, what that says, puts forth an early Christian eschatological view which has been interpreted in many ways. The Roman Catholic Study Bible, as well as the doctrines of most mainline Protestant denominations, caution that Revelation is an allegory. However, some Christians, including many evangelicals and fundamentalists, read Revelation as a prophetic script containing a timetable to the future end times. The contents of these books are discussed in the relevant articles, particularly in the article Book of Revelation. Among the principal relevant epistles of the New Testament books of Romans, especially chapter 15, if the Gentiles have shared in their spiritual benefits, they are obligated to minister to Jews in material needs. In chapter 11, a hardening in part has come to Israel until the full number of the Gentiles has come in, and thus will all Israel be saved. And especially the book of Hebrews, which elaborates the history of Judaism, relating the events of the Torah and Ketuvim as a foreshadowing of the Christian era, and describes the relationship of the Jewish people to God in a continuing context. Christian schools of doctrine which consider other teachings to counterbalance these doctrines, or which interpret them in terms of distinct eschatological theories, are less conducive to Christian Zionism. Among the many texts which address this subject as counterbalance are the words of Jesus, as for example in Matthew, "The kingdom of God will be taken away from you and given to a nation producing the fruits of it." And the writer of Hebrews' discussion echoed in 1 Peter of the Christian church as fulfilling the role previously fulfilled by the faithful Jews in the temple, and the doctrine of Paul was expressed in Galatians that in Christ there is neither Jew nor Greek. Though many Christian Zionists believe that conversion of the Jews to Christianity is a necessary adjunct of the second coming or the end of days, conversion of the Jews is not part of the theology of prominent Christian Zionists such as John Hagee, and was not thought to be required by the 19th century Restoration advocate William Eugene Blackstone. Both pro-Zionist and anti-Zionist schools of thought may be influenced and motivated by the description found in Revelation and the message to the church at Philadelphia. "Behold, I give of the synagogue of Satan, and of those who say they are Jews and are not, but lie. Behold, I will make them to come and worship before your feet, and to know that I have loved you." This description is often offensive to Zionist Jews, who otherwise find some common ground with Christian Zionism in their support of an ethnic Jewish state in the Holy Land. Nonetheless, it forms one of the foundational ideas underlying some support for Christian Zionism and plays a definitive role in its eschatological script of prospective events. Christian Zionism is a name applied primarily by opponents to the political implications of the views expressed by advocates of the restoration of the Jews who may subscribe to one of several theological systems. Christian support for the restoration of the Jews was brought to America by the Puritans who fled England. In colonial times, Increase Mather and John Cotton, among others, favored restoration of the Jews, but it was not until the early 19th century that the idea gathered impetus. Israel Stiles of Yale was a prominent supporter of restoration of the Jews. Anyways, let's see. Let's skip a little bit. Okay. The role of certain Christians in supporting the establishment of Israel following World War II is well known. It is regarded by some critics as, in part, a kind of self-willed fulfillment of prophecy. Given this, some are alarmed by what else Christian Zionists envision being done to bring about the conversion of the Jews and the end of the world. As an example, Hal Lindsey, one of the most popular American promoters of dispensationalism, has written in the late great Planet Earth that per book of Ezekiel, that after Jews fight off a Russian invasion, Jews will see this as a miracle and convert to Christianity. Their lives will be spared the great fire that God will put upon Russia and people of the coastlands. Per book of Zechariah, 1/3 of Jews alive who have converted will be spared. In United States politics, Christian Zionism is important because it mobilizes an important Republican constituency, fundamentalist and evangelical Protestants who support Israel. And you see that all the freaking time. The Democratic Party, which has the support of most American Jews, is also generally pro-Israel, but with less intensity and fewer theological underpinnings. Sociologically, and if you really get into that, America's support of Israel and different things, it is kind of weird, actually. It's almost strange how much we do support Israel. Even though, I understand that they're the only democratic system of government in the area or whatnot, but still at the same time, it's kind of fishy. I've also heard that Israel has the biggest organized spying on the United States, which that's a whole other subject in itself. But anyways, let's continue. Sociologically, Christian Zionism can be seen as a product of the peculiar circumstances of the United States, in which the world's largest community of Jews lives side by side with the world's largest community of evangelical Christians. There has historically been a somewhat antagonistic relationship between these two communities, largely based on the generally liberal, progressive social policy tendencies of the Jewish community with the more rugged individualist leanings of the American Protestant communities, more so than any theological dispute. Their mutual reverence for the texts of the Hebrew Bible has brought them together, however, as has their common ground against generally leftist, pro-Palestinian, and or anti-Israeli factions in American politics. The mobilization of evangelicals has tended to bolster the so-called neoconservative policies of the Republicans, because Christian Zionists tend to favor a hawkish foreign policy and have less sympathy for Palestinian claims than do the Democrats. Examples of Christian leaders combining political conservatism with Christian Zionism are Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson, leading figures of the Christian right in the 80s and 90s. Falwell said in 81, "To stand against Israel is to stand against God. We believe that history and Scripture prove that God deals with nations in relations to how they deal with Israel. They cite part of the book of Genesis, those who curse you, Israel, will be cursed, and those who bless you will be blessed." The government of Israel has given official encouragement to Christian Zionism, allowing the establishment in 1980 of the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. So they're publicly, officially encouraging the idea that Jews should have their own state, and that eventually they'll all convert to Christianity. It's just crazy. The main function of the embassy is to enlist worldwide Christian support for Israel. The embassy has raised funds to help finance Jewish immigration to Israel from the former Soviet Union, and has assisted Zionist groups in establishing Jewish settlements in the West Bank. Which I guess, political-wise, I guess you'd want people to believe that you were, the chosen people of God. The Third International Christian Zionist Congress, held in Jerusalem in February 96, issued a proclamation which said, "God the Father Almighty chose the ancient nation and people of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to reveal his plan of redemption for the world. They remain elect of God, and without the Jewish nation, his redemptive purposes for the world will not be completed. Jesus of Nazareth is the Messiah and has promised to return to Jerusalem, to Israel, and to the world. It is reprehensible that generations of Jewish peoples have been killed and persecuted in the name of our Lord, and we challenge the Church to repent of any sins of commission or omission against them. The modern ingathering of the Jewish people to Eretz Israel and the rebirth of the nation of Israel are in fulfillment of biblical prophecies as written in both Old and New Testaments. Christian believers are instructed by Scripture to acknowledge the Hebraic roots of their faith and to actively assist and participate in the plan of God for the gathering of the Jewish people and the restoration of the nation of Israel in our day." Let's see. Popular interest in Christian Zionism was given a boost around the year 2000 in the form of the Left Behind series by Tim LaHaye and Jerry Jenkins. The novels are built around the prophetic role of Israel in the apocalyptic end times. let's see here. Okay, we'll go on. The Latin Patriarchate of Jerusalem, or the Catholic Center of Jerusalem, the Syrian Orthodox Patriarchate of Jerusalem, the Episcopal Church in Jerusalem and the Middle East, and the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land have recently joined together in order to proclaim and to publish the Jerusalem Declaration on Christian Zionism. This declaration rejects Christian Zionism for substituting a political military program in place of the teachings of Jesus Christ. The statement is very critical of Christian Zionism because it provides a worldview where the gospel is identified with the ideology of empire, colonialism, and militarism. Palestinian Christian leaders have also been very vocal in supporting the Kairos Palestine document, calling for a boycott against Israel until it stops its discriminatory policies in the Palestinian territories. The General Assembly of the National Council of Churches in November 2007 approved a resolution for further study, which stated that the theological stance of Christian Zionism adversely affects justice and peace in the Middle East, delaying the day when Israelis and Palestinians can live within secure borders, relationships with Middle Eastern Christians, relationships with Jews, since Jews are seen as mere pawns in an eschatological scheme, relationships with Muslims, since it treats the rights of Muslims as subordinate to the rights of Jews, interfaith dialogue, since it views the world in starkly dichotomous terms. The Reformed Church in America, at its 2004 General Synod, found the ideology of Christian Zionism and the extreme form of dispensationalism that undergirds it to be a distortion of the biblical message, noting the impediment it represents to achieve a just peace in Israel-Palestine. The Mennonite Church published an article that referenced what is called the ongoing illegal seizure of additional Palestinian lands by Israeli militants, noting that in some churches under the influence of Christian Zionism, the congregations adopt illegal Israeli settlements, sending funds to bolster the defense of these armed colonies. As of 2007, churches in the USA that have criticized Christian Zionism include the United Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, and the United Church of Christ. And here we're going to take a turn into the wild and the fantastic and the crazy. And this is from a forum, forum.fok.nl/topic/609692. And this is, we'll go in to the weird reptilian dragon thing I was talking about earlier, if you can remember. Anyways, David Icke talks about a small group that has ruled this planet for thousands of years and has passed on their rule from generation to generation through their bloodline. The rulers have maintained this bloodline through the intermarriages of the so-called royal family monarchies over the course of thousands of years. The so-called Eastern establishment in the U.S. and the European and British establishment also intermarry in the same way to maintain their bloodline. Because, a lot of these people, this is true, a lot of the rulers, a lot of the families, even in the United States, they definitely have direct bloodlines to each other. And if we were talking about with the divine right of kings, is that it was believed for a long time that the king actually gave the power, or the God actually gave this power to the king to rule on earth, because he was just like God, which that whole idea goes back, we showed clear back to ancient Egypt at least. And then you'll find, which I'll go into, and we might go into it a little bit on this show, but I'll go into it in another show, the fact, or not, it is not a fact, but the idea that Jesus procreated, and that certain bloodlines of the ancient kings and stuff actually descended. They're actually descended of Jesus, but it's just the same establishment of the divine right of kings that we've seen talked about time and again. David points out that all 43 presidents in the United States are related, and that 33 of the presidents can be traced back to the bloodline of Charlemagne, King Charlemagne, the Holy Roman Emperor. This possible truth alone should be sending off major alarm bells in your mind. Like this is no coincidence. The odds of this randomly happening are billions to one. David's theory is that possibly several thousand years ago, non-humans came to this planet and mated with the beings on planet Earth. Because of their superior knowledge, they were able to expand their rule and control this planet to this day. They maintain their special bloodline for these thousands of years through intermarrying amongst themselves. David Icke says they can shapeshift, to be able to look like human beings and at the same time they can look like reptilians. David explains that this group of reptilians supposedly set up all the organized religions, monarchies, school systems, science, all the media, and everything else they needed to control the masses of humanity over thousands of years. And again, this is from that message board, but yeah, I mean, this is a very condensed version without, a lot of proof, but at the same time, it is kind of strange to think about. David goes into details about this group being satanic and performing human ritual sacrifice throughout the course of history and currently underground on a large scale to this very day. And again, I don't mean to cut in again, but there'll be a show on vampirism, and in the show on vampirism we'll get into that, where it is actually kind of weird how many people of these bloodlines were really into drinking blood and drinking blood to prolong their lives and things like that. Anyways, just ask yourself, go back to the article, just ask yourself the question, where have all the missing children all over the world disappeared to? This is a horrendous question to confront, but the possible answers to this question is important to face up to. If we are to look at the possibility that a very evil group is actually performing human sacrifice in this world today on a large scale, too sick to imagine. Only the answers to such a question can allow us to stop them, if this is really happening. You may find yourself saying, how could this group be getting away with mass murder and insane atrocities such as these? One possible answer is that if you control all the major mass media, it can be possible to suppress even the most hideous possible truth. Anyone even raising such a question is shown in the media to be just one of those crazy conspiracy nuts. But before passing judgment and dismissing such an unbelievable possibility, at least let's have a major serious investigation of where have all the disappearing children gone. If you remember, the problem was so great in the USA that the faces of thousands of missing children were put on milk cartons across the nation. And yet no president nor anyone in the U.S. government has ever called for a serious investigation of this out-of-control potential mass murder of children problem, which I think that's probably exaggerated, because I'm sure someone's looking for him to some extent, and it's not completely ignored. But it is strange. Lately, there have been several key developments that need questioning and answers. The space station has been continually in the process of being built now for probably 20 or so years. Right now, it appears to have turned into a large coalition project of the United States, Russia, Europe, and Japan, and maybe others. Just how big the space station will eventually be, or what is the ultimate goal of the space station, is not told to the people, nor talked about in the media. But it seems like a lot of work is going on up there. Plus, you have the Mars, Venus, Saturn, and other space probes working up there at a quickening pace. And you have many sightings of UFOs all over the world, plus all the crop circle stuff, which are never addressed in the corporate-controlled media in any serious way. Now, how do all these billions of dollars being spent on the space station and space probes benefit the 6 billion poor human slaves on this planet? How is this benefiting the 30 million human beings, mostly children, who die of starvation every year? There is no benefit. In fact, it is robbing the slaves of hundreds of billions of dollars that could be used to help wipe out poverty in the United States. Yeah, it's political stuff right here, but let's see. We'll skip forward. Those that are familiar with the Illuminati understand how the Illuminati work. They take small steps at a time, covertly, so the masses won't realize what's going on, thereby diverting attention from what they're really up to. Somehow the space program fits into their plan, and it would be a good idea for the 6 billion humans on this planet to investigate the agenda of the Illuminati and all their affiliated groups in regards to this. Well, I guess when I started reading this, I thought it was going to be more about the Reptilians. Let's see. Anyways, we'll skip forward. The Reptilian and other entities which are manipulating our world by possessing human bodies operate in frequencies between the third and fourth densities. These are referred to as hidden spaces and planes unknown to man. In the apparently ancient emerald tablets, which I quote from in Children of the Matrix, for simplicity, okay, I'll skip forward again. It's obviously not making too much sense at this point. It is from here that they police our vibrational prison, the Matrix, and seek to addict and restrict us to the dense physical senses. This world was once far less dense than it is today, and the fall down the frequencies caused by the manipulation of incarnate consciousness and DNA infiltration has made it so much more difficult to maintain a multi-dimensional connection while in its physical form. The reptilians and other manipulating entities exist only just outside the frequency range of our physical senses. Their own physical form has broken down and they can no longer reproduce. Thus they have sought to infiltrate human form and so use that to exist and control in this dimension. They choose the earth for this infiltration because it most resembles in vibration the locations from which they originate. Let's see. These reptilians are addicted to the dense physical world and the sensations it offers, and they have no desire to advance higher. Their aim in this period is to stop the earth and incarnate humanity from making the shift from dense physical prison into multi-dimensional paradise. Let's see. Skip a little bit forward. These reptilians and their allies have corrupted Earth DNA with their own, and this genetic infiltration lies dormant until it is activated by the vibrational fields generated by the Illuminati secret society rituals, and others in the public eye like the carefully designated coronations and official ceremonies of many kinds, including even the UK state opening of Parliament and certainly those of the various religions. This activation is now also being inflicted upon the general population through technology on Earth and in space, no doubt, and this channel entity said that the cloning program is there to develop designer bodies for the reptilians of the in-between world that would not require the overpowering of an already incarnate consciousness. Alright, I think we've heard enough of this. Let's see. Apparently, this DNA infiltration is known within the inner circles of the British royal family as the, quote, family disease. They are actually in fear of it because they know that once it is activated they will be taken over. But of course they are caught in a world of constant ritual and ceremony designed specifically to activate their possession. It is catch-22. Without the ritual they cannot be the royal family, but with the ritual they are activated and possessed. The thought and emotional processes of the UK Queen Mother are not those of Elizabeth Bowes Lyon, the little girl officially born into that body 101 years ago. They are controlled by the reptilian entity or entities which possessed her after the hybrid DNA activation. Alright, it's getting wild. Let's see. Let's go a bit farther. Here, we'll get in. Okay. We're still on the same article from that message board. I will refer to the clay tablets, therefore, as the Sumerian texts or tablets. They are one of the greatest historical finds imaginable, and yet 150 years ago they were discovered. They are still ignored by conventional history and education. Why? Because they demolish the official version of events. Sorry about that. According to Zacharias Sitchin, texts say that the Sumerian civilization was a gift from the gods. Not mythical gods, but physical ones who lived among them. The tablets call these gods the Anunnaki, those from heaven to earth came, and Dingir, the righteous ones of the blazing rockets. I don't know. Do they have a word for rockets? The ancient text known as the Book of Enoch also called the gods the Watchers, as did the Egyptians. The Egyptian name for their gods, the Neteru, literally translates as Watchers, and they said that their gods came in heavenly boats. According to Zacharias Sitchin, the tablets describe how the Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru during the early formation of the solar system. Nibiru caused the near destruction of a planet that once existed between Jupiter and Mars. The Sumerians called it Tiamat, a planet they nicknamed the Watery Monster. They said it was the debris from Tiamat's collision with a Nibiru moon which created the Great Band Bracelet, the asteroid belt which is found between Mars and Jupiter. What remained of Tiamat was thrown into another orbit, the text says, and eventually became the Earth. The Sumerian name for the Earth means cleaved one because a vast hole was created, they say, by the collision. Interestingly, if you take away the water in the Pacific Ocean, you will be left with a gigantic hole. Okay, let's skip a little bit further. We'll skip further. There, all over the planet, you find the ancient legends and accounts of gods from another world who interbred with humanity to create a hybrid network of bloodlines. The Old Testament, for example, talks about the sons of God who interbred with the daughters of men to create the hybrid race, the Nephilim. Before it was translated into English, the passage read the sons of the gods, plural, but the Bible accounts are only one of the many that describes the same thing. It is estimated the Sumerian clay tablets found at what we now call Iraq in the middle of the 19th century tell a similar story. It is estimated they were buried around 2000 BC, but the stories they tell go back long before that. The tablets talk of a race of gods from another world who brought advanced knowledge to the planet and interbred with humans to create hybrid bloodlines. These gods are called in the tablets the Anunnaki, which apparently translates as those from heaven to earth came. Let's see. The ancient accounts tell us that these hybrid bloodlines, the fusion of the genes of selected humans with those of the gods, were put into position of ruling royal power, especially in the ancient Near and Middle East, and advanced cultures like Sumer, Babylon, and Egypt, which we read earlier in this show. I mean, it's everywhere. They almost all attribute their power to rule from heaven, and it will usually go back further to say that they are descended from one of the gods themselves. But it happened elsewhere also, as you will find, for example, in the amazing information provided on this site by the African Zulu shaman Credo Motwa, and in the incredible Credo videos, Reptilian Agenda, Parts 1 and 2, he tells the same story from the Black African tradition that I have uncovered elsewhere in the world. The accounts of the serpent race in ancient cultures are simply endless wherever you look, and the serpent reptilian symbolism in relation to the Anunnaki and other versions of these gods is equally widespread. We see in the Bible, for instance, with the serpent in the Garden of Eden, a story which clearly comes from the Sumerian accounts, as does the story of Moses and the bulrush, is a story told about a Sumerian king long before the Bible. This is why I found it so astounding when I was told by Zechariah Sitchin, the best-known translator of the Sumerian tablets. Well, that's definitely an exaggeration. There are more translators of those tablets than just him. He was the first one that started publishing books and making the connection between, like, the Anunnaki and that they came down and that there was a separate godlike race that created man and made them into slaves. That's where that, But anyways, he has also strongly advised me in relation to the serpent race, don't go there. Why, when the evidence, ancient and modern, is so enormous? From these bloodlines has come the origin of the divine right of kings, the belief that only certain bloodlines have the God-given right to rule. In truth, this is not the divine or God at all. It is the right to rule from the reptilian gods by way of your hybrid genetics. These bloodlines later became the royal and aristocratic families of Europe, and thanks to the Great British Empire and the other European empires, they were exported to the Americas, Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and right across into the Far East, where they connected with other reptilian hybrid bloodlines, like those most obviously in China, where the symbolism of the dragon is the very basis of their culture. These reptilian human hybrid lines became the political and economic rulers of these lands occupied by the European empires, and they continue to rule these countries to this day. And I'd like to step in and remind everyone, this is not what I believe necessarily. This is just a presentation of an idea. The United States of America has been home to hundreds of millions of people since 1776. What's more, these people came from an amazingly diverse genetic pool, and yet the 42 have become the 42 who have become presidents of the United States are all related. 33 of them alone go back to Charlemagne, one of the most murderous monarchs of what we call France. He just happens to be a major figure in the story of these bloodlines and their expansion. The Rothschilds, Rockefellers, the British royal family, and the ruling political and economic families of the U.S. and the rest of the world come from these same bloodlines. This is why the so-called Eastern Establishment families of the United States interbred with each other as obsessively as the European royal and noble families have always done, and similar families across the world. It is not because of snobbery, it is to hold as best they can a genetic structure. Which, I mean, really, almost in every culture before modern day, bloodline and that stuff was very important regardless. Let's see. A little bit further. And let's see here. Now we're getting into these supposed rituals, which, I mean, even in the we'll get into the vampirism episode. We'll see that they were in fact drinking blood. I'm not so sure how ritualized it was or anything, or the involvement of the quote reptilians, but it is prevalent. Anyway, to go back to the article, partly these rituals and abuse networks are to do with traumatizing people, especially children, but it is far more than just that. Follow the Illuminati reptilian bloodlines from the ancient world to now, and they have always taken part in human sacrifice ceremonies and blood drinking. The sacrifices, quote, to the gods in the ancient accounts were literally sacrifices to the reptilians and their hybrid bloodlines, which who knows about, The story of the blood-drinking Dracula is symbolic of these reptilian vampires. One of the locations of this reptilian group would appear to be the star system known as Draco, or the dragon. To hold their human form, these entities need to drink human blood and access the energy it contains to maintain their DNA codes and their human expression. If they don't, they manifest the reptilian codes, and we would all see what they look like. Oh my God, Mr. President, do you always eat your breakfast from across the room? From what I understand from former insiders, quote-unquote, the blood energy of babies and small children is the most effective for this, as are blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. Hence, these are the ones overwhelmingly used in sacrifice, as are red-haired people also, it appears. And, from the Aleister Crowley episode, and this is one of the interesting things and why I do the occult religion series, is because a lot of these things and conspiracies and weird in UFO fields and just different things like that, you can find these same things in the occult world, or the writings of magicians and whatnot, and it's just a very interesting connection. At some point, a lot of this stuff is connected. But anyways, let's go. This is why people like George Bush, Henry Kissinger, and a stream of the other Illuminati big names are exposed in my books and on this site as reptilian shapeshifters who take part in human sacrifice and blood drinking. The two go together. There also appears to be a very significant emphasis among the Illuminati reptilians and their offshoots with pedophilia, which is rampant on this planet. And then again, you get into the old magic writings and stuff. I would emphasize also before I end here that I am exposing certain reptilian groups behind the Illuminati, not the reptilian genetic stream in general. There are many of reptilian origin who are here to help humanity to free themselves from this mental and emotional bondage. Indeed, every one of us has a body with such much reptilian genetics, including part of the brain called the R complex, which is pretty interesting. The R complex, the reptilian brain. Let's see. Oh, let's see. Alright, we'll go on to the next one. Shape-shifting queens. We're still in the same article. It's a big one. Arizona Wilder, a recovered mind control sex slave, told me how she had conducted sacrificial rituals involving the British royal family, Tony Blair, and famous American Illuminati names like George Bush, Bill and Hillary Clinton, Henry Kissinger, and many others. The highest operative she knew in the Illuminati, she said it was a guy calling himself the Marquis de la Beau, or of the Water. His code name was Pindar, which she says means penis of the dragon. Arizona told me how the Queen and Queen Mother regularly sacrificed babies and adults at many ritual centers, including the castle in Balmoral, Scotland, where they were staying at the time Diana was ritually murdered in Paris. The royal family involved in human sacrifice was fantastic enough, but here again came the constantly repeated theme. She described how, during the rituals, these people shapeshift into reptiles. Diane Gould, head of the U.S. organization Mothers Against Ritual Abuse, also confirms this theme. In a telephone conversation about ritual abuse, Diane asked me if I could explain why many of her clients reported that participants in their rituals had turned into reptiles. People might want to dismiss all this, but they should know that while they close their eyes and their minds, children are being sacrificed all over the world. It could be true. Children are being sacrificed all over the world this very day by the reptilian bloodlines. Many thousands of them go do the main ritual dates. Arizona talked about some of her experiences with Queen Mother. The Queen Mother was cold. A nasty person. None of her cohorts even trusted her. They have names and altar after her. They call it the Black Queen. I have seen her sacrifice people. I remember her pushing a knife into someone's rectum the night the two boys were sacrificed. One was 13 and the other 18. You need to forget that the Queen Mother appears to be a frail woman. When she shapeshifts into a reptilian, she becomes very tall and strong. And it's strange to me sometimes when I read this reptilian stuff, because I've read the rituals and stuff. They sound accurate, kind of, but it always seems like they throw in the reptilian thing and it makes it sound crazy. So sometimes I wonder if this whole reptilian thing isn't just to throw us off of something that is being said. Some of them are so strong they can rip out a heart, and they all grow by several feet when they shapeshift. I have seen Prince Charles shapeshift into a reptilian and do all the things the Queen does. I have seen him sacrifice children. There is a lot of rivalry between them for who gets to eat what part of the body and who gets to absorb the victim's last breath and steal their soul. I have seen Andrew participate, and I have seen Prince Philip and Charles' sister Anne at the rituals, but they didn't participate when I was there. When Andrew shapeshifts, he looks like more like one of the lizards. The royals are some of the worst. Okay, as far as enjoying the killing, enjoying the sacrifice, and eating the flesh, they are some of the worst of all of them. They don't care if you see it. who you are going to tell? Who is going to believe you? They feel that it is their birthright, and they love it. They love it. Various high-level Satanists who have escaped from the Illuminati were eyewitnesses to Satan appearing at the Rothschilds. They testified they witnessed Satan showing up at the Rothschilds as a very beautiful man who can shapeshift. At times his feet would be cloven hooves. He wears a black tuxedo to gamble and plays cards, and a white tuxedo when present just to socialize. He can also shapeshift into a reptilian. As a sincere researcher, I must report that lots of info about shapeshifting reptilians has confronted me in so many independent places in such a wide variety of historical periods that this bizarre topic must have some importance. I've withheld my findings for years because I feel quite tentative about my results. David Icke gives details of this strange topic and his bold views in The Biggest Secret. That was from Fritz Springmeier at Bloodlines of the Illuminati. It was after the destruction of Atlantis that the reptilians, who are now... let's skip this. It's a little too much reptilian. Let's go into the Merovingians. This bloodline and its offshoot includes a long line of pharaohs in ancient Egypt, including Ramesses II, who is considered to be the greatest pharaoh of all. And I don't know about the historical accuracy of this, but it'll still be interesting. He was as his country's master architect, and his name can be found on almost every ancient shrine. The gold mines of Nubia made him rich beyond imagination. This bloodline also includes the extraterrestrial human hybrids who ruled Sumer, Greece, and Troy, and which today rule the world, which is going back, let's see. One common link in this bloodline is Philip of Macedonia, who married Olympias, and their son was Alexander the Great, a tyrant who plundered that key region of Greece, Persia, Syria, Phoenicia, Egypt, Babylon, the former lands of Sumer, and across into India, before dying in Babylon at the age of 33. Dying in Babylon at the age of 33. During his rule of Egypt, he founded the city of Alexandria. You guys should know about the 33 at this point. If you don't, go back and listen to the Sacred Geometry video. Kind of fast forward to the end, and I go into a thing where I start talking about weird key numbers that reappear. You should probably listen to that. Alexander was taught by the Greek philosopher Aristotle, who in turn was taught by Plato, and he by Socrates. And remember, Plato was an initiate of the ancient mystery school. The bloodline and the hidden advanced knowledge have always gone together. This key bloodline comes down through the most famous Egyptian queen Cleopatra, who married the most famous Roman emperor Julius Caesar and bore him a son who became Ptolemy the 14th. She also bore twins with Mark Antony, who has his own connections to this line and its many offshoots. This bloodline also connects to Herod the Great, the Herod of the Jesus stories, and continues to the Roman Piso family, who, as I explained in The Biggest Secret, wrote the gospel stories and invented the mythical figure called Jesus. And I've never researched that, so I couldn't tell you if it's true or not. The same bloodline includes Constantine the Great, the Roman emperor, who in 325 AD turned Christianity, based on his ancestors' stories, into the religion we know today, and King Ferdinand of Spain and Queen Isabella of Castile, the sponsors of Christopher Columbus, who instigated the horrific Spanish Inquisition, in which people were tortured and burned at the stake for in any way questioning the basis of the religion their various ancestors had created. More than that, the most used version of the Bible was commissioned and sponsored by another strain in the same bloodline, King James I of England. Just a coincidence, nothing to worry about. The line of James, according to genealogy sources listed below, can be traced back to 1550 BC and beyond, and includes many Egyptian pharaohs, including Ramesses II. The bloodline moved into France and northern Europe through the Franks and Merovus, or Merovi, who gave his name to the Merovingian bloodline, and it continues with the rest of the Merovingian clan like Clovis and the Dagoberts, who connect into the elite secret society, the Priory of Sion, and the Rennes-le-Chateau mystery. Many books have been written recently which claim that the Merovingians are the bloodline of Jesus. The Merovingians are a key bloodline, yes, but it has nothing to do with Jesus, who was invented by an earlier family in the same line, the Pisos, which, I don't know about all that. I mean, really. You could probably take the story back even farther than that. And that's why I always say I believe in the words of Jesus, not necessarily the mythology of his actions. Anyways, we'll continue. Authors like Sir Lawrence Gardner must know this, and yet they still connect the Merovingians to Jesus. Why? The Merovingians were goddess Diana worshippers, or as are so many in this line to the present day. They founded the city we call Paris, and in one of their former sites of Diana ritual, Princess Diana was murdered in the Pont des Almes tunnel, meaning the bridge of the moon goddess, which that's an interesting connection. That Princess Diana was murdered in the under the passage of the moon goddess, whose name is Diana. That's interesting. From the Merovingians, this bloodline's connection to the present day include Charlemagne, Robert II, Philip I, II and III, Louis I, II, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 13th, 14th, and 16th. The latter married Marie Antoinette of this same bloodline, and both were executed in the French Revolution. But they produced a son who became Daniel Pasteur, who, as The Biggest Secret explains, was taken to the United States where he became the secret force behind the Morgan and Carnegie empires, and owned vast amounts of real estate, banking, and industrial holdings. This bloodline also connects to the de' Medici family, which supported Christopher Columbus and produced Catherine de' Medici, the Queen of France, who died in 1589. Her doctor was Nostradamus. It includes René d'Anjou, Duke of Lorraine, and the House of Lorraine, which employed Nostradamus and Christopher Columbus. The bloodline relatives of the de' Medicis and the House of Lorraine, Queen Isabella of Castile, and King Ferdinand of Spain were also sponsors of Columbus when he discovered, quote-unquote, the Americas. This bloodline also includes the Habsburgs, the most powerful family in Europe under the Holy Roman Empire, Geoffrey Plantagenet, and the Plantagenet royal dynasty in England, King John, who signed the Magna Carta, King Henry I, II, and III, who were extremely close to the Knights Templar, Mary Stuart and the Stuart dynasty, including James I of England, Prince William and Harry from Charles' marriage to Princess Diana, U.S. Presidents George Washington, John Adams, John Quincy Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and George Bush are all named in the charts as strands of this bloodline. It was passed on to the year 2000 U.S. presidential favorite George W. Bush Jr. and his brother Jeb Bush, the governor of Florida. In fact, if you go deeply enough into the genealogical research, you will find that all the presidents are from this line. Let's see. Go a little bit further. The gods were not as an abstract concept to early humans as they are in your world today, which that is debatable. The humans knew and were familiar with them and their abilities and capabilities. The gods did not tell man that they were aliens, and aliens will not tell man that they are gods. Man, when he achieves a more evolved state and is free to explore the vast reaches of space, will not declare himself a god to those less evolved that he makes contact with. Man knows that he is man and that God is God. Liars and other misfits of your species are not allowed into your space program. What? I don't know where this is going. Anyways, the structures that the ancient gods instructed man to build were not spaceports or landing pads. They were temples. The gods ordered the temples built not because the gods needed or wanted them, but because man needed them. The gods do not physically live there. It was a place where mankind could go to be in the spiritual presence of the gods. Humans still have some resemblance of that form today, but the function is totally missing. And let's see. Skip a lot of this. We'll go, okay. We'll skip toward to Wikipedia. The Jesus bloodline. A Jesus bloodline is a hypothetical sequence of lineal descendants of the historical Jesus and Mary Magdalene, or some other woman, usually portrayed as his alleged wife or Herodule. Differing and contradictory versions of a Jesus bloodline hypothesis have been promoted by numerous books, websites, and films of nonfiction and fiction in the late 20th and 21st centuries, which have almost always all have been dismissed as works of pseudo-history and conspiracy theory. According to a vast majority of professional historians and scholars from related fields, there is no historical, biblical, apocryphal, archaeological, genealogical, or genetic evidence which supports this hypothesis. Hypothetical Jesus bloodlines should not be confused with the biblical genealogy of Jesus or the historical relatives of Jesus and their descendants, who are known as the Dismissals. The 13th century Cistercian monk and chronicler Peter of Vaux de Carne claimed it was part of Catharist belief that the earthly Jesus Christ had a relationship with Mary Magdalene, described as his concubine. Early Mormon leaders Jedediah Grant and Orson Hyde stated it was part of their religious belief that Jesus Christ was polygamous, quoting an apocryphal passage attributed to the 2nd century Greek philosopher Celsus. The grand reason why the Gentiles and philosophers of his school persecuted Jesus Christ is because he had so many wives. There were Elizabeth and Mary and a host of others that followed him. The Jesus bloodline hypothesis, which held that the historical Jesus had married Mary Magdalene and fathered his child with her, was brought to the attention of the general public again in the 20th century by Donovan Joyce in his 1973 book, The Jesus Scroll. In his 1977 book, Jesus Died in Kashmir, Jesus, Moses, and the 10 Lost Tribes of Israel, Andrea Faber-Kaiser explored the legend that Jesus met, married, and had several children with a Kashmiri woman. The author also interviewed the late Basharat Salim, who claimed to be a Kashmiri descendant of Jesus. Michael Bagent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln developed and popularized the hypothesis that a bloodline from Jesus and Mary Magdalene eventually became the Merovingian dynasty. In their 1982 book, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, in which they asserted, the symbolic significance of Jesus is that he is God exposed to the spectrum of human experience, exposed to the first-hand knowledge of what being a man entails. But could God, incarnate as Jesus, truly claim to be a man, to encompass the spectrum of human experience without coming to know two of the basic, most elemental facets of the human condition? Could God claim to know the totality of human existence without confronting two such essential aspects of humanity as sexuality and paternity? We do not think so. In fact, we do not think the Incarnation truly symbolizes what it is intended to symbolize unless Jesus was married and sired children. The Jesus of the Gospels and of established Christianity is ultimately incomplete. A God whose incarnation as man is only partial. The Jesus who emerged from our research enjoys, in our opinion, a much more valid claim to what Christianity would have him be. In her 1992 book, Jesus and the Riddle of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Unlocking the Secrets of His Life Story, Barbara Thiering also developed a Jesus and Mary Magdalene bloodline hypothesis, basing her historical conclusions on her applications of the so-called Pesher technique to the New Testament. In her 93 book, The Woman and the Alabaster Jar, Mary Magdalene and the Holy Grail, Margaret Starbird developed the hypothesis that Saint Sarah was the daughter of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and that this was the source of the legend associated with the cult as Sainte Marie de la Mer. She also claimed that the name Sarah meant princess in Hebrew, thus making her the forgotten child of the Sangreal, or the blood royal of the King of the Jews. In his 1996 book, Bloodline of the Holy Grail, The Hidden Lineage of Jesus Revealed, Lawrence Gardner presented pedigree charts of Jesus and Mary Magdalene as the ancestors of all the European royal families of the Common Era. His 2000 sequel, Genesis of the Grail Kings, the explosive story of genetic cloning and the ancient bloodline of Jesus, is unique in claiming that not only can the Jesus bloodline truly be traced back to Adam and Eve, but that the first man and woman were primate alien hybrids created by the Anunnaki of ancient astronaut theory. Here we go, like I always say, you'll always see these same themes over and over. The 2000 book Rex Deus, The True Mystery of Rennes-le-Chateau and the Dynasty of Jesus, Marilyn Hopkins, Graham Simmons, and Tim Wallace Murphy developed the hypothesis that a Jesus and Mary Magdalene bloodline was part of a shadow dynasty descended from 24 high priests of the temple in Jerusalem known as Rex Deus, the Kings of God. In 2003, the conspiracy fiction novel The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown accepted some of the above hypotheses as being valid. Elements of some Jesus bloodline hypotheses were propounded by the 2007 documentary film The Lost Tomb of Jesus by Simcha Jacobici, focusing on the Talpiot tomb discovery, which was also published as a book entitled The Jesus Family Tomb. In 2007, psychic media Sylvia Brown released the book The Two Marys, The Hidden History of the Mother and Wife of Jesus, in which she tries to further validate the possibility of Jesus and Mary Magdalene producing a family. In the 2008 documentary film Bloodline, Bruce Burgess, a filmmaker with an interest in the paranormal, claims to have found a mummified corpse, of which is allegedly Mary Magdalene in Rennes-le-Chateau, France, in what appears to be a Templar burial, supposedly proving the existence of a Jesus bloodline. Burgess claims to be currently working with the French government on a full-scale excavation of the sites. Basharat Salim, the late Kashmiri caretaker of Martyr's Tomb of Uz Asaf in Srinagar, claimed to be of the Jesus bloodline. Michael Roger Lafosse, a Belgian false pretender to the throne of the former Kingdom of Scotland, claimed to be of the Jesus bloodline. Kathleen McGowan, an American author, lyricist, and screenwriter, as well. Let's see. In reaction to the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, the Da Vinci Code, and other controversial books, websites, and films on the same theme, a significant number of individuals in the late 20th and early 21st centuries have adhered to a Jesus bloodline hypothesis, despite its lack of substantiation. While some simply entertain it as a novel, intellectual proposition, others hold it as an established belief thought to be authoritative and not to be disputed. Prominent among the latter are those who expect a direct descendant of Jesus will eventually emerge as a great man and become a Messiah, a great monarch who rules a holy European empire during an event which they will interpret as a mystical second coming of Christ. The eclectic spiritual views of these adherents are influenced by the writings of iconoclastic authors from a wide range of perspectives. These writers often seek to challenge modern beliefs and institutions through a reinterpretation of Christian history and mythology. Some try to advance and understand the equality of men and women spiritually by portraying Mary Magdalene as being the apostle of a Christian feminism, and even the personification of the mother goddess or sacred feminine, usually associating her with the Black Madonna, which I think if you've listened to the Isis, Osiris, Horus history, you should probably have a good idea on who the Black Madonna is. Anyways, some wish the ceremony that celebrated the beginning of the alleged marriage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene to be viewed as a holy wedding, and Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and their alleged daughter Sarah to be viewed as a holy family, in order to question traditional gender roles and family values. Almost all these claims are at odds with scholarly Christian apologetics and have been dismissed as being New Age Gnostic heresies. No mainstream Christian denomination has adhered to a Jesus bloodline hypothesis as a dogma or an object of religious devotion, since they maintain that Jesus, believed to be the Son of God, God the Son, was perpetually celibate, content, and chaste, and metaphysically married to the Church. He died, was resurrected, ascended to heaven, and eventually will return to earth, thereby making all Jesus bloodline hypotheses and related messianic expectations impossible. Many fundamentalist Christians believe the Antichrist, prophesied in the book of Revelation, plans to present himself as descended from the Davidic line to bolster his false claim that he was the Jewish Messiah. The intention of such propaganda would be to influence the opinions, emotions, attitudes, and behavior of Jews and Philo-Semites to achieve his satanic objectives. An increasing number of French Christian eschatologists believe the Antichrist may also present himself as descended from the Jesus bloodline to capitalize on growing adherence to the hypothesis in the general public. Jesus' bloodline hypotheses parallel other legends about the flight of disciples to distant lands, such as the one depicting Joseph of Arimathea traveling to England after the death of Jesus, taking with him a piece of thorn from the crown of thorns, which he later planted in Glastonbury. Historians generally regard these legends as pious fraud produced during the Middle Ages. The Jesus bloodline hypothesis was from the book of the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, is not contained in any of the Priory de Sion documents, and was dismissed as fiction by Pierre Plantard in 1982 in a French radio interview, as well as by Philippe de Cherisy in a magazine article. However, Plantard's Priory de Sion documents prior to 1956 were found to be forgeries, which are planted in French institutions to be later rediscovered. Plantard only claimed that the Merovingians were descended from the tribe of Benjamin, which contradicts the hypothesis of a Jesus bloodline as the missing link between the Merovingian line and the Davidic line from the tribe of Judah. The notion of a direct bloodline from Jesus and Mary Magdalene and its supposed relationship to the Merovingians, as well as their alleged modern descendants, House of Habsburg, the Grand Ducal family of Luxembourg, Clan Sinclair, the House of Stuart, the House of Cavendish, the House of Bourbon, House of Orleans, and other noble families, is strongly dismissed as pseudo-historical by a qualified majority of Christian and secular historians such as Darrell Bach and Bart D. Ehrman, along with journalists and investigators such as Jean-Luc Chamil, who has an extensive archive of this subject matter. In 2005, UK TV presenter and amateur archaeologist Tony Robinson edited and narrated a detailed rebuttal of the main arguments of Dan Brown and those of Bagent, Lee, and Lincoln, The Real Da Vinci Code, shown on Channel 4. The program featured lengthy interviews with many of the main protagonists and cast severe doubt on the alleged landing of Mary Magdalene in France, among other related myths, by interviewing on film the inhabitants of Sainte Mary de la Mer, the center of the cult of Saint Sarah. The Jesus bloodline hypothesis from the book Rex Deus, The True Mystery of Rennes-le-Chateau, and the Dynasty of Jesus hinges on the testimony of the author's anonymous informant Michael, who claimed to be a Rex Deus scion. Evidence supporting the hypothesis was supposedly lost and therefore cannot be independently verified because Michael claimed that it was contained in his late father's bureau, which was sold by his brother unaware of its contents. Some critics point out the informant's account of his family history seems to be based on the dubious work of Barbara Thiering. Robert Lockwood, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Pittsburgh Director for Communication, sees the notion of the Church conspiring to cover up the truth about a Jesus bloodline as a deliberate piece of anti-Catholic propaganda. He sees it as a part of a long tradition of anti-Catholic sentiment with deep roots in the American Protestant imagination, going back to the very start of the Reformation of 1517. Although Jesus bloodline hypotheses were not submitted to the judgment of the Jesus Seminar, a group of scholars involved in the quest for the historical Jesus, from a liberal Christian perspective, they were unable to determine whether Jesus and Mary Magdalene had a matrimonial relationship due to dearth of historical evidence. They concluded that the historical Mary Magdalene was not a repentant prostitute but a prominent disciple of Jesus and a leader in the early Christian movement. Bart D. Ehrman, who chairs the Department of Religious Studies of the University of North Carolina, commented that although there are some historical scholars who claim that it is likely that Jesus was married, the vast majority of New Testament and early Christianity scholars find such a claim to be historically unreliable. Ultimately, the notion that a person living millennia ago has a small number of descendants living today is statistically improbable. Steve Olson, author of Mapping Human History, Genes, Race, and Our Common Origins, has published an article in Nature demonstrating that as a matter of statistical probability, if anyone living today is descended from Jesus, so are most of us on the planet. Historian Ken Mondesine ridiculed the notion that the bloodline of Jesus and Mary Magdalene could have been preserved. Infant mortality in pre-modern times was ridiculously high, and you'd only need one childhood accident or disease in 2,000 years to wipe out the bloodline. Keep the children of Christ marrying each other, on the other hand, and eventually they'd be so inbred that the sons of God would have flippers for feet. Chris Lovegrove, who revealed the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail when first published in 1982, dismissed the significance of a Jesus bloodline, even if we're proven to exist despite all evidence to the contrary. If there really is a Jesus dynasty, so what? This, I fear, will be the reaction of many of those prepared to accept the author's thesis as possible, and the book does not really satisfy one's curiosity in this crucial area. Which is not necessarily true, I would have to agree, because if Jesus really did have a bloodline, then that would contradict with the claim by the Catholic Church that they are the true church, because who would carry on the church naturally if it wasn't, for Peter, it would be the descendants of Jesus. Anyway, I hope you somehow made it through this damn long-ass show. But, yeah. Thanks for listening. Hopefully you learned something.